Lurking at the bottom of Camp Crystal Lake, among the newts and the frogs, the mud and all things forgotten, lays a drab grey creature named Jason Voorhees. Famed as the antagonist of the Friday the 13th films, the silent hockey-masked murderer stalks his prey, most of whom horny teens, and dispatches them with ease as he makes his way to the obligatory final girl. But this essay asks, why is he got to be so boring? In comparison to the collective of other 80s slasher icons, Evil Doll Chucky, the leather-clad Pinhead and his Cenobites, or even Jason's former direct enemy in Freddy Krueger, they all exude a charisma. There is an identity to all of them that is distinct and memorable. And, well, Jason's never really had that. Scary, sure. With the mask, the machete, his gigantic size, and his inability to be killed, Jason is certainly terrifying as this silent killer. But is he really that interesting? One could easily argue that Jason was at his most intriguing through the guise of his mother, all the way back in the 1980 original.
Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
As a scorned woman seeking revenge for the careless death of her son Jason, Mrs. Voorhees gives us the main beats of his backstory for what would become an adult Jason in the sequel, and straight up every Jason that followed. From there, Jason set off on his 30-year killing spree across cinema, but the lore never developed onwards. By the third film, Jason had found his image in his iconic hockey mask, but the character remained a silent, nondescript, and impossible-to-kill monster. While Freddy and Chucky grew in confidence and became more talkative with each outing, of which there are many, Jason didn't. He remained mute, stum, silent.
That's good.
Even the lesser valued icons in Warwick Davis's Leprechaun and Tony Todd's Candyman exuded more charisma and confidence in what they were doing than the glorified shop mannequin that is Jason Voorhees. The Leprechaun taunted his villains while Candyman preyed upon their fears and cultures. And both were steeped in enough lore to make them feel at least somewhat three-dimensional. Even fellow silent slashers in Halloween's Michael Myers and Texas Chainsaw's Leatherface were given enough background to either start off interesting or to become interesting. In Tobe Hooper's 1974 horror masterpiece, arguably its finest scene comes during that grotesquely balmy family dinner. Somehow a mix of dusty and sweaty all at once, it's pungent and gives an outsider's look into this monster's home life. With 3 generations of freaks and cannibals, while their Leatherface also sits in as well, it actually gives the Screaming Sally an idea of what she's in for, and why exactly this chainsaw-grasping monster of a man is the way that he is now. Similarly, fellow mommy-obsessed horror Psycho includes its Oedipus ideals alongside its killer, something that Friday the 13th didn't manage. Whereas Norman Bates is the one committing the murders, his upbringing is clear by the end. An abusive and obsessive mother that gave him next to no identity of his own, which he now inhabits and coexists with in his own fractured mind. All contained in a single film, by contrast, Friday the 13th versus its sequel makes Jason feel like an afterthought, an excuse to make more movies and continue the success that the first movie brought with it, but with very little connector to the original.
Mommy has a reward for you.
Even when we are given the kills via Jason's own point of view, effectively showing us what it must be like to be this madman, it's something that Psycho, Peeping Tom, and even Halloween utilised earlier and accomplished far more successfully too. Whereas his peers grew in confidence throughout the 1980s and 90s, albeit with often diminishing returns,
on the other hand, I think Halloween 2 is an abomination and a horrible movie.
Freddy could crack jokes and spout zingers, even at its best question the inner workings of the mind, while Jason and his movies lacked all of the above. Each new sequel quite literally didn't say anything fresh that the one before it hadn't already. Jason didn't evolve as a character, nor did the Friday the 13th films. As a result, Jason's victims, a mix of your Alices, Jacks, and Bills, all quickly became a paint-by-numbers checklist to be killed off, which, following a long list of sequels and a remake, would only repeat to a T. Take the preemptively titled Friday the 13th, The Final Chapter. Immediately following the events of the film before it, Jason is taken to the morgue, returns from the dead, and makes his way back to Crystal Lake. With the film starting where the last ended, we can only assume that this is also literally the next day, as a new set of kids make their way to the lake for the weekend. It's a cyclical process that doesn't ever veer or alter. Jason is killed, wakes up, and tries to kill everyone. Repeat. But don't just take my word for it. For For this essay, I enlisted the help of someone far more educated in the occult and all things slasher. Here's a totally unbiased view from Freddy Krueger's biggest fan, Diandra of Captain Sassy Media.
Jason is just the best slasher ever. I adore him so much. Surprise! It's me, Diandra, the Elm Street gal. I've been summoned to talk about Jason. No, not my Jason. I mean that hockey-loving mama's boy from Friday the 13th. I'll start with some positives. He's an icon of horror, and the reason that slasher summer exists. Jason can make literally anything into a weapon. He's big, burly, and loyal to a fault. On the other blade, he's also got the personality of a wet mop, and he really isn't all that different from Michael Myers. He's a ruthless killer, but there was a reason that Freddy was selected to be the villain in Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy is a mean SOB. Jason is just a walking pity party built like a bear, a teddy bear. And his movies? The same formula pretty much every time. You're cute, Jason, but Team Freddy all the way.
You've got to be kidding me. Bronski.
Thank you so much, Diandra. And go check out her channel, she's dope. Let's look at Jaws as a side-by-side example. A movie away from the slasher horror we've already talked about, but with enough similar DNA to put it in the same genre. A small town is terrorized by a killer shark. An out-of-his-depth chief of police must protect the bay, while his higher-ups are telling him to keep the beach open for the sake of tourism. In doing so, a little boy is killed. A mother grieves, and experts are brought in to ultimately try and kill the shark so it can't hurt anyone else. Right there, you have your small-town setting, tick, your locals and intern victims, tick, and your antagonist. Jaws is a classic, but only works because we get to know the characters at stake along with Brody's home life, and overall it's a world that feels built up and real. The kills from the shark itself are only interesting and all the more shocking overall because of the background to these people having been built up first. As such, the stakes are higher. The bodies that we see from the shark carry more weight, something that the Friday the 13th series often ignored and failed at. While Jason has as much characterization as a great white shark, so did his victims, in that there wasn't any beyond inevitably becoming body bags. And when the kids are given something to do, it's a catch-22 of gestures and guesses amongst one another at this killer's origins and urban legends, only somewhat contributing to Jason's lore each time, and adding bland decoration to an already weak cake before they're killed off and never to be seen again. Not to mention, with his peers' sequels over time, the lore was at least attempted to be elaborated on. Freddy was the bastard son of 100 maniacs. Halloween developed the bloodline and revealed that Laurie Strode was actually Michael's sister. While none of these creative choices were exactly great per se, they at least showed an attempt at developing their villains and giving them more motivation and a deeper backstory as to why they do the things they do and continue to do so.
That Strode girl, that's Michael Myers' sister. She was born 2 years before he was committed.
The final chapter, however, would at least kick off and try and make some attempt at altering the recipe, with an introduction of what would essentially become Jason's number one enemy in Tommy Jarvis, and essentially giving Jason his Jamie Lee Curtis. Introducing him as a boy in Part 4 and having him aged up over Part 5 and 6, we see Tommy ultimately trick and then best Jason, but with devastating effects on his mental health as he becomes unresponsive, violent, and obsessive. From here, the narrative would repeatedly frame Tommy as unhinged and set him up to be the real killer, supposedly having taken over from Jason. It's the most interesting arc throughout the series, and it's just not talked about enough. The last time we saw Friday the 13th on screen was in the 2009 remake. It received middling reviews at the time and entirely failed to revive the series. Feeling too little too late, the Jason character himself felt archaic versus the late noughties horror trends at the time, which had morphed and mutated from the slasher of the 1980s. The 2000s had become synonymous for the wildly unfortunate torture porn trend through Saw and Hostel. By 2009, we were on our fourth final destination, and a trilogy of screams had already mocked the genre for all it's worth. And, as a side note, even New Kid on the Block in Jigsaw and the various ghost faces came and immediately were more interesting and chattier than Jason. Perhaps it's telling then that Jason's peers could get remakes of late and they actually work. Halloween returned in 2018 and just finished off its New Take trilogy, while Candyman took on a current day of ACAB politics in its remake-cum-sequel from 2021, and Hellraiser the year after. All included fresh, up-to-date casting decisions, spicy hot right now writers, and current themes. Ditto, even with the death of writer-director Wes Craven, Scream is also going strong. Freddy showed up in the hit TV show The Goldbergs, and The Leprechaun had a new movie in 2018. Texas Chainsaw came out in 2022. With another iteration of Friday the 13th and Jason cautiously mooted for the future, where does this mute slot into the current day trends versus your elevated horrors of Jordan Peele and the acting masterclasses of your Mia Goths? Does he at all? But it's not all bad. 2017's Friday the 13th the game saw players as Jason himself or his victims, and was generally well liked. Its success would also help similar genre movie Texas Chainsaw Massacre enter the video game world just this year. But then again, the series did also give us maybe the best on-screen death ever with this. So, yeah, swings and roundabouts maybe.
What are you gonna do?
And that is it for this time. But what do you think? Is Jason as dull as we've made him out to be? Why not let us know in the comments? And if you've made it this far, you might as well subscribe. I'd like to give a big thank you to Diandra and the Captain Sassy team for everything they've done. We loved what you put into this. And until next time, remember to join Holmes.